Hello, and welcome to English 401, Advanced Fiction Writing. For this semester, we're going to be focusing on the short story cycle. My name is Tanya Perkins, and I'm going to be your instructor. I'm a full-time member of the English faculty at IU East, and I write fiction primarily, specifically the short story. That's the genre that I work in mostly, although lately I've been experimenting with hybrid genres. Okay, so this is an entirely online course. Your work is going to be done through Canvas. That's our course management system, and that's going to be the main way in which we communicate. That said, I am available through regular email as well as in my office if you happen to be within driving distance of Richmond, Indiana. And I'll also obviously through phone calls. I'm always available through phone calls. I'm doing this video in my living room on my iPad, so it's a little odd. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is a 400 level creative writing course. What that means for me is that I assume if you're taking a 400 level creative writing course, you already have the basics under your belt. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time going over what plot is or dialogue or characterization or things like that. So that said, we will be doing some short craft exercises intended to help you focus on aspects of craft, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the basics because, as I said, it's 400 level. My approach to teaching this course is sort of a twofold or binary. First of all, I strongly believe that to be a good writer, good fiction writer, you need to be a good fiction reader. You need to have a really good foundation in a wide variety of literature. So we're going to approach the short story cycle. And let me say, I realize I haven't defined what that is for you yet, so you're probably wondering, what the heck is that? But I will in a moment. We're going to approach the short story cycle from a literary perspective. We're going to look at it as a literary genre, as well as from a writer's perspective, as a genre in which you are going to be experimenting this semester. So your main work this semester is going to be producing or writing your own 3-story cycle. We're going to be looking at 3 different short story cycle or short story collections that offer together, I think they offer a really good range of what this genre can do. Okay, so what do I mean when I say the short story cycle? This genre is known by many names, and at the same time, it's almost invisible. Oftentimes, this genre gets called a novel, or a novel composite, or a novel in stories. But I am here to say, my perspective is, and I would argue that the short story cycle is not a novel. Instead, what it is a collection of short stories in which each short story can stand on its own as an independent work, but at the same time is informed by the short stories around it. So when you read them together in company with each other, you arrive at a much broader, in-depth, more complex understanding of the characters, the story, and the whole project of what the writer's trying to do. So it's really important to note that with the short story cycle, you do not have chapters. You have independent stories. And an independent short story differs from a novel chapter in some key ways. The main way is that when you come to the end of a novel chapter, there is expectation that that particular plot thread will be picked up again. Maybe not in the next chapter, but at some point you're going to come back to the questions raised or the events presented in that chapter. There is no such expectation within the short story cycle. When you arrive at the end of a short story within the collection, you get a very strong sense that you are stepping out of that world. There is no need to read any other story beyond that one story. However, when you do encounter other stories within the cycle, your understanding of the events within that story become enriched. Okay, so it sounds much more complex than it really is. We're going to be looking at a range of ways in which the short story cycle is created. So some short story cycles feature a common protagonist, that is to say, one or more characters that appears and reappears in many of the stories. Other short story cycles do not do that. So as you write your own collection this semester, you will have available to you a range of strategies that you can choose from in creating your short story cycle. And you're not obliged to use any particular strategies, but I will be looking for you to use at least 2 different methods of creating that sense of cohesion within your collection. As I said, we're going to be looking at probably 6 or 8 different methods by which cohesion can be created. Okay, so we're going to be reading 3 different cycles this semester. I try to choose short story collections that offer a range of experiences. And obviously not everything is going to be to everyone's taste. So I try to choose, okay, let me back up a minute. As a genre, the short story cycle has been around for a very long time. In fact, some scholars, identify short story cycles all the way back to ancient texts like the Old Testament, the Bhagavad Gita, and even some of Homer's poetic cycles. I think, though, that for our purposes, when we talk about the short story cycle today, it's a relatively modern genre. So we have the short story cycle in the forms that we're mostly familiar with are going to start appearing sometime in the late 18th and 19th centuries. And for me, personally, I think it really took shape in the beginning of the 20th century, even though there were predecessors. One of the most important short story cycles for us in the English-speaking world was published in the early 20th century by James Joyce, and it's Dubliners. I often teach that. I'm not teaching that this semester, though. But when I was thinking about the books that we're going to look at for this semester, I wanted to choose one that represents a relatively early modernist form, one that represents a much more contemporary form, and one that represents perspective of a minority group. And the reason I mention this last one is because the short story cycle as a genre lends itself to a writer's ability to explore groups on the margins of society, whether that's through cultural differences, ethnic, racial, gender, whatever it is. There's something about the somewhat disruptive nature of the narrative structure of short story cycles that offers a very effective way for exploring certain perspectives. So with that in mind, and also I wanted to share with you 3 very different writing styles. So the first short story cycle that we're going to look at is Hemingway's In Our Time. It's a very interesting little collection. It's quite short, and I should say of the 3 collections we're looking at this semester, 2 are quite short, pretty easy reads. So this was published in, I'm just blanking out now, I want to say 1922 or 23. So shortly after the end of World War I. So that's the first one we're going to look at. We're going to talk more about that in upcoming modules. The next one we're going to look at is, I can't remember which one we do next, but these are the next 2. Monkeys by Susan Minot and Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. Both wonderful books, both very, very different books. So Love Medicine takes place mostly on a Dakota Indian reservation. So Louise Erdrich herself has Native American ties, and most of the characters in here it really explores the challenges and the interlocking stories of 3 different families on a Dakota reservation starting in the early part of the 20th century and going right through the 80s. It's wonderfully written. It's one of my favorite books. And then Monkeys is has a very different tone, and it looks at a family, a single family in New England in the 70s and 80s. So I think you'll enjoy these. As far as, and I realize I'm at 11 minutes now already, I want to get this wrapped up, but as far as how our work will work, I use modules. The work, I've organized our work pretty sequentially, so I strongly encourage you to start with the first module and simply work your way through page by page within the modules. Each module has everything you need to do for that week. Our readings, as I said, come from these 3 collections. I will also be posting criticism and other, maybe other scholarly essays regarding this genre. And then we'll be doing some short craft assignments, and we'll be communicating with each other within the class, primarily through discussion forums. I have heard that some students simply use the to-do list that appears in Canvas and just go and just do whatever is on that list. Please do not do that. If you only rely on what comes up on the to-do list, you will miss important work. I do try to use the assignments function within Canvas, but there may be other tasks that you need to do that will not appear on your to-do list. If you just go to the modules, follow the modules through each week, page by page, get all the work done for that week, you'll be just fine. You'll have everything you need. I can't think of anything else. Let me just say one last thing. I realize I'm at 12 and a half minutes already. But just as kind of a heads up, one challenge that students often have is not following up on the discussion forums. So there will be a discussion forum pretty much every week where you will post some sort of response either to the reading or to exercises you've done, and then you will be asked to comment on other students' posts. And this is how we create the sense of a discussion within Canvas. Oftentimes students will do the initial posting, but then they'll forget to come back a day or 2 later and do the follow-up comments. Please make sure you do that. The instructions will be in the discussion forum assignment itself, and the due date for your original post, as well as for your comments in response to others' posts, will be there. Typically, the original post is usually due on the Thursday of the week, and then your follow-up comment due on the Sunday of the week. And I really do my best to be very consistent with those due dates. However, not every due date, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, will show up on your Canvas to-do list. So it's very important that you pay attention to the modules themselves and the instructions that you'll find on those pages. If you have any questions, I'm here. I aim to respond to you pretty quickly. So please feel free to send me a Canvas message, or you could call me during my office hours. I think I've even put my cell phone on the syllabus. I look forward to working with you this semester.